Welcome back to the Naughty Corner. It's been a while. New Zealand's COVID response treated the careers of my wife and I like a couple of students in front of a tank at Tiananmen Square. After that, we watched another Kiwi election where the vast bulk of a country famous for its population for sheep voted exactly the same way they always had, expecting a different result. Einstein had something to say about that, and it rhymes with amenity. Following that, we, unable to meet the cost of living back home, have been forced to immigrate to our oceanic neighbours, Australia. That's the reason for the long hiatus, that and not bringing with us a mic for recording, something we've only just recently been able to remedy. It wasn't for lack of content. The last 2 years have been wild, so let's have a quick recap on some of the most significant things I missed commentating on. For a start, I missed commentating on the most recent US election cycle, and boy was the show more entertaining than anything Hollywood has put out in some time. One candidate ended up with a mugshot one he'd clearly practiced in the bathroom mirror because for some reason his opponents thought making him look as gangster as possible was a good idea. The other candidate had a very senior meltdown on the debate stage in front of the whole world. This prompted his party to promptly swap him out in favour of what was at the time his 2RC without a primary or any other way for people to vote on it. Pushing this catastrophic lack of democracy further, all of the former's fundraising was then quietly shifted to the campaign of the latter. Meanwhile, the mugshot flaunting felon, which I do not mean disparagingly as it was clearly a case of lawfare, had to endure two very public assassination attempts. The first of these taking place in Butler, Pennsylvania, and resulted in perhaps one of the most iconic photos of this century. There were people that clearly wanted to stop the bad orange man by whatever means necessary, but 45 took it all in stride. In response to his opponent's claims that she persevered through a blue-collar grind working at McDonald's, something the convenient plastic nourishment chain denied, the belligerent billionaire rolled up his sleeves and did a stint himself, working fries and serving at a drive-through window under the Golden Arches. Not long after that, Kamala's surreptitiously replaced predecessor Joe took to the mic and declared to the nation that the supporters of Cheeto Hitler were a load of garbage. I'm still not sure whether this was intended as a boon or curse for his cackling supplanter because, in response, the Don turned up to one of his rallies in a converted garbage truck and seemed none the worse for wear. It was truly the most eventful election cycle in living memory, and once the dust settled, resulted in a blowout victory for the evidently rad orange man. He won every swing state, the popular vote, with every single state and approximately 90% of all counties shifting towards him, that is, towards the MAGA party. If it sounds like I've been glazing Trump a bit, yeah, that's right, to show the other side of what is an almost clownish animosity towards him in New Zealand and Australian media. He does occasionally say silly things, do wrong, make mistakes, but on the whole he's a fantastic president. If you call him a tyrant, Hitler reborn, etc., you're also implying that the majority of Americans voted for that, which is quite the statement and not the kind of hate train I'm willing to get on board. Since we're starting up again, I thought we'd try something new. I'll let my lovely wife do some of the talking intermittently, to ease the pain of listening to me droning on. So with that, take it away, sweetheart.
Moving on from that radio, it's not the drama of the US election that is interesting, but the impact to the globe. Not just in terms of foreign policy and economy, but also culture, of which America is a major exporter. Despite everyone claiming Trump would start World War III, as they'd also claimed in the run-up of his first term, much the opposite has happened. He ended 8 global conflicts so far, 9 if you count the 20-minute-long casualty-free war with Venezuela where American forces abducted the South American dictator Nicolas Maduro. It was the Biden administration that placed a $50 million bounty on his head, yet Joe's supporters seemed quite upset about it, as did a lot of the world leaders, despite most of them previously not recognizing Maduro's presidency as legitimate. Another short-lived conflict that was touted as the Third World War at the time was when Iran fired an insensible amount of missiles at Israel, only to have their key political figures and military installations erased shortly thereafter. One of the most high-profile ways in which the new administration had an impact was the creation and empowerment of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. Named after an internet meme and helmed by the world's richest man, Elon Musk, whose properties, Tesla in particular, had come under significant attack from political agitators after publicly supporting Trump's bid for office. On their website, DOGE claims to have saved over $200 billion worth in fraud and waste, over $1 million per taxpayer. Whether that's true or not, I can't tell you, as there's no way I'm going through that many receipts, but it's easy enough to find if you're nosy. Some of the receipts they posted would be pretty hilarious if they weren't being paid for with taxpayer money. For example, USAID, the United States Agency for International Development, not USAID as is often misconstrued, funding the following. Funding for positive youth experience in Gaza. It must have been really positive because it cost $36 million, with another $24 million going towards resilient livelihoods in Gaza. More than $27 million went towards male circumcision and condom programs. I'm not sure why circumcision is the business of US taxpayers, let alone their responsibility to fund. Money went towards diversity and inclusion programs in Burma and Serbia, Guatemala, and against Serbia receiving funding for LGBTQ+ advocacy, as did a Middle Eastern version of Sesame Street, etc., etc. DOGE's discoveries of fraud involved far more than just US aid. For example, the Department of Health and Human Services was found to have spent more than $22 billion on aiding illegal immigrants through resettlement programs, home and care purchases, and very charitable loans. Something we'll return to later in this episode.
The second major impact of the Trump administration is that legacy news media organizations in the US, scuttlebutt traders that have long done nothing but opinion pieces, have taken a substantial hit regarding income and influence. Now, I'm not saying that the uncovering of corruption had a direct impact on such organisations, particularly left-leaning outlets which have content sharing agreements with New Zealand news providers like stuff.co.nz or The Herald, but I am strongly implying it's a suspicious coincidence. It could be as simple as more and more people are catching on to the fact they peddle nothing but bollocks. CNN and MSNBC ratings are in a death spiral. Rachel Maddow had to take a pay cut. Wolf Blitzer and Jake Tapper were denied raises. Joy Reid, Jim Acosta, Neil Cavuto, Lester Holt, Chuck Todd and Chris Wallace, all gone, let go, fired. Each one of them was a major figure in the left-wing legacy media. Both PBS and NPR were defunded, ABC was forced to pay a $15 million defamation suit to Trump, and Paramount was forced to settle for $16 million over editing a propaganda piece in the guise of objective journalism for Kamala Harris on 60 Minutes.
The third major impact of new management is closely related. The other far-left propaganda-spreading media empire, but this one not news-focused, they're entertainment-focused, Hollywood. Though they used to produce entertainment, Tinseltown now primarily promote what the critical drinker refers to as the message. For years, they've been making movies that lose money, and many have wondered how such a business model can persist. But it appears the wellspring might finally be drying up. Woke Doctor Who was cancelled, intersectional feminist Wheel of Time was cancelled, head of Amazon Studios Jennifer Selke fired, Rachel Zegler's Latinx Snow White bombed, Captain African American bombed, Kathleen Kennedy is out at Lucasfilm due to their most recent offering, The Acolyte, being the worst-rated Star Wars property ever produced. Late-night comedy show ratings continue to tank. Not counting the pandemic year of 2020 and not even adjusted for inflation, October of 2025 had the worst box office earnings for that month since 1997.
Other interesting things happened in the States outside of the presidential race and the actions of the elected administration. The CEO was assassinated on public streets and it was celebrated. One college student stabbed another to death and raised millions on GoFundMe. Just before leaving office, Joe Biden preemptively pardoned a bunch of people for crimes they had yet to be convicted of, but this ruling has come under question since it was found to have been signed by an autopen and not one operated by the president himself. Interestingly for this channel, with our history of criticising the COVID response, one of those pardons was for Dr. Anthony Fauci. Why does the good doctor need a pardon? Who knows? The head of intelligence Tulsi Gabbard accused former President Obama of treason. Hollywood was hit by some terrible wildfires, the effect of which was magnified by the city's rubbish response and lack of preparedness. There is video of firefighters trying to put out the blaze using handbags. Not more than a few months later, and Los Angeles again exploded in chaos with the biggest riots since the death of George the Fresh Prince of Nowhere Floyd in 2020. This time the riots were in response to ICE arresting illegal immigrants. Separately, but also in response to ICE, and in the same city Fentanyl Floyd lost his life, there is again riotous civil unrest in Minnesota as I record this video due to immigration enforcement shooting a citizen. As much as this incident was a legitimate tragedy, the death of convicted child abuser Renee Good as she obstructed traffic for 3 minutes and then refused to obey officers' orders to exit a vehicle, it was surely welcome news for the state's Governor Tim Walz. This is because just as 2025 was ending, one of the biggest instances of taxpayer fraud ever was uncovered in his state of Minnesota, linked directly to Walz. Remember how we mentioned earlier the obscene amount of money that was funneled into aiding illegal immigration? Well, it wasn't just to further pad an indebted voter base for the Democrats. This fraud scheme involved an extensive network of Somali-run healthcare providers, disability assistants and early childcare centres, all state-funded and all being found to be nothing more than cardboard shop-front hoaxes. This theft wasn't some small-scale thing the government missed. It was to the tune of tens of billions of dollars. The most infamous instance was the meme-worthy Quality Learning Centre, a childcare centre with a misspelled sign, misspelled address, and no actual children present on site when visited. For those who don't know, the man in question who runs the state was Kamala Harris's running mate in 2024, and had she won the election, he would now be the vice president of the most powerful country on earth. He has also been accused of ordering a political assassination. There are some very, very sordid and sinister people in politics. Speaking of which, Minnesota's other most infamous politician is Somalian-born refugee Ilhan Omar, who, with her partner, had disclosed a net worth of approximately $30,000 in 2023. That had ballooned to as much as $30 million 1 year later. And like Tim Walz, she is now under the microscope and starting to sweat.
This debacle with fraud in the US has raised questions about similar operations taking place in other states, but also other countries, including back here in Australasia. I imagine it's quite widespread throughout the world, including New Zealand, something that's existed for years amid our blissful ignorance, as it suckles off our earnings like a bloated leech. Speaking of New Zealand, last year's most interesting news is the COVID response inquiry, and the scandal that has arisen from the prime suspects refusing to front publicly. We haven't looked into the inquiry or its reporting yet after spending so much time combing through the IPCA for this channel, only to confirm all our suspicions that the government investigating itself is as legitimate as a child marking their own homework. However, if we ever start running out of content here, my hubby will give it a squiz. The other major news out of home was us looking like a bunch of muppets on the world stage due to the antics of some politicians during the current government's proposed Treaty of Waitangi reforms. Here in my newly adopted home, there were massive riots last year for the same reason and about the same time as the UK was doing likewise. It seems a lot of the West is completely fed up with paying in taxes, social cohesion, and crime for forced diversification and Islamification. As if to dot the exclamation point of these protests shortly after their conclusion, there was now a globally infamous terror incident on Bondi Beach, where an Islamic pop and sun duo went on a murder fest at a Jewish Hanukkah celebration. Very quickly, the media rushed to shine the spotlight on a brave Muslim man, Ahmed Al-Ahmed, who jumped in to oppose the gunman, while simultaneously telling us religion had nothing to do with it. Strangely, the 3 non-Muslims who lost their lives trying to oppose the murder weren't mentioned by the press at all. Also, out of the 3 Muslims involved, 66% were trying to murder people. Not a great ratio. The response by Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was swift and expected. Just like Jacinda Ardern with the Christchurch mosque shootings, they had a chance to further tighten gun restrictions and jumped on it. Like in New Zealand, law-abiding gun owners would be punished for the transgressions of the individual, or, in this case, duo. Speaking of Ardern, she released a biopic documentary imaginatively called Prime Minister. At least it wasn't titled Leading with Empathy, Governing with Kindness, or some other bollocks. The reception for her attempt to remain relevant could be called lukewarm at best, and lampooned for its transparent self-promotion. Meanwhile, Jacinda's old friend and fellow left-wing authoritarian, Justin Trudeau, has finally been ousted by Canada, but we have yet to see if he'll follow his fellow Klaus Schwab acolyte regarding a multi-million-dollar puff piece. For the record, almost $1 million of Ardern's documentary was floated by the New Zealand Film Commission, that is to say, the taxpayer.
We come finally to the single most influential event of the last year for me personally, and the reason I've decided to get back into making these videos: the assassination of Charlie Kirk. For those unaware, Kirk was an author, political commentator, and Christian evangelist who had such an impact on the young adults of American colleges that many claim it was his efforts that secured the 2024 election for Donald Trump. On campus, Charlie, who himself dropped out of college to found his own organisation, would set up a stand with a mic for himself and an open mic for anyone who would like to take it. There he would engage with people and challenge them on the ideas they were being taught at the educational institutes. While the stand was open for professors to join the exchange, and he did have some more high-profile debates with people such as Hassan Piker at Politicon, his engagement was primarily with students. Many attribute his impact to being one of the few voices in that environment telling young people that it's okay to be white, male, Christian, to love their country, safe sex for marriage, and have a big family. Charlie Kirk was an incredibly talented and intelligent speaker who had a bright future ahead of him. I'm not going to say he was my favourite, he wasn't, or the best, as that's also subjective, but I did greatly admire him and his desire to dialogue with those of opposing beliefs. To quote the man, "When people stop talking, that's when you get violence. That's when civil war happens, because you start to see the other side as so evil, and they lose their humanity." That was a sentiment clearly not shared by his shooter Tyler Robertson, because on the 10th of September 2025 at 12:23 in front of an audience of about 3,000 people including his 2 young daughters and wife, he shot Charlie and killed him. It would seem Kirk's dialogues were simply too effective and too difficult to foil with anything short of a bullet. This was exposed all too clearly with the en masse jubilation expressed by his ideological opposition at news of his death. You see, like Trump, Charlie was regularly labelled a Nazi, fascist, racist, etc. He wasn't killed because he was legitimately a Nazi, he was called a Nazi so he would be killed, and it would be considered acceptable. The difference between the 47th president and himself is that Trump's shooter missed. Even following his death, the smear campaign continued, and if anything escalated as people scrambled to take his words out of context, impede his character, and justify their murder. That kind of behaviour contributes to killing people, so we should be very careful of what we share and promote on social media. 1 month after his murder, Charlie posthumously received the Presidential Medal of Freedom on October 14th, what would have been his 32nd birthday. 10 days after his murder, a memorial service was held for him at State Farm Stadium in Arizona, attended by over 100,000 people, with online viewers potentially over 100 million. That's Super Bowl numbers for a guy that talked politics and faith to college kids. Absolutely stunning. One of the most viral moments of the memorial was when Erica Kirk, Charlie's widow, took to the stage and publicly forgave his murderer. By contrast, those who had opposed Charlie in life were unabashedly celebratory in his death, with many saying it was naught but a good start and called for further violence. The vitriol displayed during this period by Kirk's ideological enemies sparked a sense of somber concern amongst many, even many who had not heard of the man prior to this publicity, and for good reason.
Mutual toleration refers to the idea that as long as our rivals play by constitutional rules, we accept that they have an equal right to exist, compete for power, and govern. We may disagree with and even strongly dislike our rivals, but we nevertheless accept them as legitimate. This means recognizing that our political rivals are decent, patriotic, law-abiding citizens, that they love our country and respect the Constitution just as we do. It means that even if we believe our opponents' beliefs to be foolish or wrong-headed, we do not view them as an existential threat. Nor do we treat them as treasonous, subversive, or otherwise beyond the pale. We may shed tears on election night when the other side wins, but we do not consider such an event apocalyptic. Put another way, mutual toleration is politicians' collective willingness to agree to disagree. Levitsky and Ziblatt, How Democracy Dies, 2018.
The fact this mutual tolerance was breached so decisively in 2025 into thunderous applause is why I label this event the most significant of the year. Like Christus Victor, many have come to faith since the assassination, some due to seeing wholesomeness in Kirk's messaging, and some due to seeing the reality of evil in our midst. Turning Point USA, Kirk's non-profit organisation focused on political activism, had about 1,000 chapters at the time of his death, but reported as many as 50,000 plus requests to start new chapters within the 48-hour wake of his murder. Right, so where to from here, especially for those of us here in Australasia? No doubt at least some of you in the audience have questions at this point. What's so great about legacy news media going under? After all, there's inaccurate, biased and propagandizing reporting on both sides. Why am I celebrating the failures of Hollywood? Aren't you a free market capitalist who believes they should be able to make whatever movies they want? Correct on both accounts, and these are amongst many things I'll address in the next installment. There's an underlying theme, an ideological war that's been waged in the background for decades. That's the kind of video I want to focus on here on this channel, the macro forces that are influencing and causing our current events. This next episode will take a few weeks to produce, however, so in the meantime, if you want to engage further on any of the topics covered in this video, please feel free to hit me up in the comments below. Also, let us know if you like my wife chiming in now and again to break up my monologues, or was the old format better? Well, that's all for now, so until next time, this is the Naughty Corner signing out. Have a good one.